Well, thank you so much. It is really an immense honor and a great joy to have the opportunity to be here tonight with all of you and to share in one of my most favorite places in the world about my most favorite subject, which is, of course, bonobos. You know, Asheville has changed a lot since I left here in 1983 when I graduated from college. When I was your age, a lot of the students in here, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Little did I know what fate had in store for me. Back then, Asheville, downtown Asheville anyway, was a ghost town. There was nothing going on at all. River Road was lined with empty lots and factories as opposed to art galleries, and there were only a handful of decent restaurants in town. There was no rush hour either, so I guess that's the price you pay for progress. But Asheville has always been a wonderful and beautiful place, and it's really become a mecca now for the arts and environmentalism and good living of all sorts. Among its many distinctions, I learned, it's also been named the hippie capital of the South. You know, bonobos have also been dubbed the hippie chimps. So I feel like I'm in friendly territory here. You won't see any bonobos wearing tie-dye or smoking weed down on Lexington Avenue, but they are all about peace and love. If bonobos had a credo, it would be that 1960s mantra, make love, not war. They do exemplify the hippie values of cooperation and living in harmony. And we try to emulate those values in our work to protect the species. Our motto in the Congo is Sali sa bonobo, pe bonobo bako sali sa yo. That means help bonobos and bonobos will help you. It's true that helping bonobos helps every single person on the planet. And I'd like to show you how that's true. The first time I went to the bonobo habitat back in 1994, I wanted to learn everything I could, not only about the bonobos, but about the human culture that surrounded them. I was particularly fascinated with the indigenous legends about bonobos that had perpetuated taboos against hunting the apes. One of my favorites is about a man who took a long journey into the forest. He walked so far, and he finally fell down, weak from hunger. The bonobos saw him and thought the man was ill. So he came down and looked at the man, and then he realized he wasn't sick. He was just hungry. So the bonobo went into the forest and gathered food for the man, like bea, bacau, batohe, and basenda. And he brought it back to the man. And so the man ate bonobo's food for the very first time, and he found it was really good. And from that day on, people are still eating bea, bacau, batohe, and basenda, and a variety of other foods that bonobos eat, including medicinal plants people have learned about thanks to the bonobos. So the people of the Congo forest have recognized our close kinship with bonobos. So to kill a bonobo is makila mabe, bad luck or bad blood. It's like killing a member of your own family. And indeed, that's true. Bonobos and humans share about 99% of the same DNA. Now modern science has discovered what the indigenous people have known all along, which is what a close kinship we share. I first learned about bonobos 21 years ago when I was working at the National Geographic Society on a book project about the great apes. I had heard about and knew about gorillas and orangutans and chimpanzees, but I had never heard of bonobos. And still to this day, most people still don't even know that bonobos exist. And yet they're our closest living relative, along with our more commonly known cousins, the chimpanzees. Bonobos were the last great ape to be discovered. They weren't classified as a species until 1933, and then they weren't studied in the wild until the mid-1970s, almost over a full decade after Jane Goodall and Dian Fossey, Brute Galdicus got going with the other great apes. And even then, most of the research was done by Japanese scientists, so it wasn't well known in the Western world. Bonobos were also called pygmy chimpanzees, until finally it was recognized that that was a misnomer. They were not just a diminutive form of chimp. In fact, they were quite different from chimpanzees. I was awestruck to discover this amazing relative of ours. It's like not having ever heard of a lion or an elephant. And here it is, our closest relative. So I really found my holy grail, and I determined to quit my job and follow bonobos. Bonobos are more human-like. They look more human-like than the other great apes. Their bodies are more like Australopithecus. They walk on 2 feet more easily and more often than the other great apes. They're very different from chimpanzees, as you can see. Bonobos don't have this large protruding jaw or brow ridge like chimps. Their faces are flatter and darker. And they bear a one-to-one correspondence with humans in terms of their facial expressions. Bonobos laugh and smile like people do. And they're remarkably intelligent. This bonobo, Kanzi, is the most famous bonobo in the world, and he used to live just right down the road in Decatur, Georgia, at Georgia State University. Kanzi is one of my best friends and was one of my very first bonobo teachers. He has broken the language barrier. So whereas when Jane Goodall first discovered that chimpanzees use tools, it used to be that man the tool maker, that was the dividing line between humans and animals, was man-made tools. Well, after she tossed that one out, language was the dividing line. But Kanzi has shown that bonobos can actually learn to use human language naturally, just like human children, if they're reared in an environment where it's being used. This is Dr. Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, who was the pioneering scientist that broke that barrier with her work with Kanzi and his sister Pambanisha. Maybe if we have some time later, we can talk about some stories about my experiences down in Atlanta that really were very formative in my inspiration to want to help bonobos. But what distinguishes bonobos the very most is their society and their sexuality. Whereas chimpanzees have a patriarchal, male-dominated society, a competitive society, bonobos, on the other hand, have a matriarchal, female-centered society that's where peaceful cooperation as opposed to competition is the norm. And chimpanzees are the only primate other than humans that actually wage violent wars against others of their own kind, usually over territory and natural resources. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it, when you think about what most of the wars and conflicts on this earth are usually fought over. It's usually territory and natural resources. But bonobos, on the other hand, share. They're known for sharing food and sharing their resources. If they meet other groups of bonobos in the forest, they generally share food, and then they might have a little orgy. The other aspect about bonobos is that they're the only primate other than humans that has sex for recreation and not just procreation. And they do so in pretty much every form and fashion you can think of, including with members of the same gender. So, bonobos. This is why they've been dubbed the Make Love Not War Apes or the hippie chimps, because they do make love and because they represent peace in their society. I like to think of bonobos and chimps as representing the yin and yang of human nature, the male and female paradigm, if you will. And I think we have a lot to learn about bonobos. You know, theories of evolution had been formed before people really knew about them, and so it was just accepted that humans are naturally violent and competitive. But we have another side of our nature, one that we might do well to emulate, especially this time in our own cultural evolution, when we need to learn how to cooperate and share resources to ensure our own survival. So bonobos are only found in one country in the world, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's right smack dab in the belly of Mother Africa. They inhabit the heart of the world's second largest rainforest, the Congo Basin rainforest, which, along with the Amazon, is the second lung of the planet, essential for all life. It sequesters carbon, it produces oxygen, it regulates rainfall, it harbors vast biodiversity. More than half of the plant and animal species in Africa are found in the Congo rainforest. So bonobos live in this area south of the Congo River that's in color, whereas chimps and gorillas live north of the Congo River. Unfortunately, the Congo, despite the fact that it harbors untold beauty and vast richness, minerals and animals and plants, it has been the scene of some of the worst human atrocities that this world has ever known. The Congo has suffered a terrible war between 1996 and 2003 that took the lives of more than 5 million people. That's more than any war since World War II. And the conflict going on in the eastern Congo continues, even though there was a peace treaty in 2003, and the bonobo habitat has been relatively peaceful and always was, really. Over here in the east, the conflict continues, and it's really having an impact on the country's ability to move forward. This terrible conflict also impacted everything in the country, and of course it impacted all wildlife, including bonobos, with many displaced people having to flee into the forest and broken down infrastructure. People had little means to survive other than hunting. And basically they'll hunt anything that they can smoke and carry to a market to sell, including bonobos. Unfortunately for bonobos, this is a very serious threat because bonobos only have a child every 4 to 5 years. So if you kill a few bonobos, they don't bounce back like antelopes or other, bush pigs or other types of animals that breed more often. This is what has really decimated the bonobos. The other major threat to their survival is habitat degradation through slash and burn agriculture and logging. One irony of the Congo conflict is that it kept a lot of industrial logging out because people, couldn't operate the country during those years. But now that peace is back, this is a looming threat. So, in 1998, I had originally quit my job at National Geographic 5 years before that, determined to follow bonobos, thinking I would just write about them to try to help them that way. But as I investigated, I found really nothing was being done to protect them. And one thing led to another, and so we founded the Bonobo Conservation Initiative in 1998. At that time, we didn't know where bonobos were. Of course, we had to wait out the war, but at that time this is this Longa National Park, that sort of two halves of a park, and two little research sites where researchers had worked. But other than that, we had no idea where the bonobos even were. So the first order of business was to find where they were. And the way we ended up doing that was using a different methodology than common practice, which was we asked the people who lived there. It seems pretty obvious, but it's not really the way most conservation groups operate. We realized that the only way to protect the bonobos is to work with the people who live in that forest with them. And those people know the forest better than anybody. So when we were first starting out, we had a lot of meetings, and I'm showing you this picture because these two men are two of my most important collaborators from the very beginning. The one on the left is Albert Lotano Bussola. He's the head of Vie Sauvage in the Kokolo-Puri Bonobo Reserve. And the man on the right is Dr. Mwanza Ndunda. Mwanza is a man who got his PhD in biology in Russia during the Cold War. He speaks 7 languages. And these guys were the leaders, and still are, along with a very vast group of other partners that we formed in the Congo. So as we were thinking about how are we going to protect the bonobos, how are we going to stop people from hunting them, and how are we going to protect their habitat, we thought, oh, well, maybe a peace park. The war was going on, bonobos are a symbol of peace. And all the Congolese were, no, not park. We don't want a national park, it won't work. The model where you draw a boundary and throw the people out, it's not going to work in this area. People live there. And that was what we knew too. We needed a holistic model, a community-based model where people actually benefited from conservation and were leaders in it. And that's how we developed the concept of the Bonobo Peace Forest. which is a constellation of community-managed nature reserves that are supported by sustainable development. And this is President Joseph Kabila at a reception we hosted for him at the National Geographic Society. Kabila brokered the peace deal in the Congo, and I had the opportunity to meet with him back in those early days in 2002 when we came up with this idea of the peace forest, and he loved it because he also saw that wise management of natural resources was the key to lasting peace in his country. So that's what we did. We started off with a process we called information exchange, where we went out in the habitat and talked to people about where are the bonobos and tried to assess, where it would be wise to do scientific surveys, all the while respecting the indigenous traditions, whereas rather than just sending a crew of outsider researchers, we trained Congolese scientists to do the surveys, and we respected the indigenous traditions, which are usually that you have to have permission to enter a forest. The chief, opens the forest for you. And that's how we had a 100% success rate in our first bonobo surveys and discovered bonobos in 12 important regions. This led to grassroots projects in most of those places, which then led to the formation of the Kokolo-Puri Bonobo Reserve and the Sankuru Nature Reserve. Those two protected areas are about the size of Massachusetts and Rhode Island combined. So it's a vast area of rainforest and really pioneering a new model for community-based conservation in a holistic way with sustainable development. At Kokolo-Puri, and I'll show you more about this later, our work is actually self-replicating, where Kokolo-Puri has inspired other communities nearby to protect bonobos. So now I want to take you into the habitat and just give you a flavor of what it's like. The bonobos, of course, are the great reward, but they live in one of the most remote places on the planet, one of the most difficult to reach. Just to get out to Kokolo-Puri, this is an aerial view of the forest, and when you're flying over the Congo forest, it just goes on and on and on forever. You just see a sea of trees. The Congo River, of course, is huge, more than 2 miles across in some places, and gorgeous. So it takes us about 10 days going upriver in the good ship Bonobo, which consists of 3 dugout canoes, pirogues. They're huge rainforest trees that are dug out, and we put 2 outboard motors on the back of them, and we build a hut over top of them, put bamboo beds and mosquito nets, and travel up the river for 10 days just to get to Kokolo-Puri. That's from Bondika. That's Michael Hurley, who has been my partner for the past decade in this work. He rescued a dwarf crocodile on one of the river trips. It's our favorite thing because it's like a vacation, and you never know what kind of adventures are going to come up. But just imagine, you're going so deep into the middle of some of the most untouched forest in the world. There's no electricity, there's no running water, just going along the river. It looks like a Rorschach test, with the reflections on the side, miles and miles and days. And you come across little villages and fishermen that you can buy fish from, and it's really an amazing experience. We're now working on ecotourism trips. I don't think too many people want to take the dugout canoe trip. And so there is a faster way, which is a bush plane. You can get to the site in a day or 2 that way. But you also have to reckon with the national highway system, which consists of dirt paths and bridges that are not for the faint of heart. That's a pretty good one right there. And when you get to Kokolo-Puri, we have lots of merriment. We have really forged a partnership with the people there and have developed this program for the past decade together with them. With the women, we always dance and sing, and we work with the local and indigenous chiefs. The reserve governance is based on the Congolese natural system of, their traditional governance system. And look who I ran into on my last trip. I didn't even know Asheville had a rugby team until I went all the way to Coco to find out. So at each site, really the first thing we do is we train trackers and eco guards who go and follow the bonobos every day and protect them. And I'll just share a little story. One thing we've discovered is that bonobos really like it when we have to go out really early in the morning, like about 4 o'clock in the morning. Depends on where their night nests are, but you want to get there while they're still asleep. And so after, a long time of suffering, I realized, for heaven's sake, let's take some coffee and let's take some food. And so we did, and we learned that bonobos thought that was very interesting. And so when we're sitting there, because they share food, it's part of their culture. I've also noticed this with orphan bonobos we've rescued, that they prefer to eat if you're eating too. So when we're sharing food, the bonobos tend to come close, and it makes viewing them much more easy. This is one of our pals we named Boma Lure, which means kill the hour. It's a combination of Lingala and French. And he's always hanging back and keep distracting the trackers when the group moves on to another location. He's just so curious, he likes to hang out. And I was going to tell you, it's the bonobos when they eat, they make some of the most wonderful noises. If they are eating fruits that they really like, they sort of chortle and so it's not just sex that they get a lot of enjoyment out of, they really like food. And here's one of their favorite foods. It's also a favorite food of the humans in the area. These are beanjos, otherwise known as caterpillars. And they're crunchy on the outside, gooey on the inside. But to make the project work, following the bonobos, hiring the trackers, that's just the first step. The next step is to really help the local communities. And so at Coco we worked with the people, and one of their most urgent needs, which is true of all the sites where we work, is health care. So we were able to open a health clinic. That's Dr. Saidi praying over an appendix patient. And this little clinic that we've opened with the help of volunteers and people who just want to pitch in and help, is serving about 8,000 to 10,000 people. It's saved countless lives. Other interventions we've made are with sustainable agriculture. The people's cassava, their staple crop, had this mosaic disease. So you see these huge roots. Well, the roots were like little hairs. They were nothing. People were malnourished, and it was really a crisis. So we partnered with an agriculture nonprofit and got disease-resistant cassava, which we bred at Coco and then spread throughout the entire region. And you can see the result. And that's helped reduce, it's a higher yield, so there's less impact on the forest, and it also helps people to have something to sell. We've sent students to college. This is Veronique, who was top in her class at Conservation Biology School. We've started microcredit programs with the women's cooperatives. Many of the women lost their husbands during the war, and so the women's groups are really a mainstay. As you know, the village is built on the back of the women, so we try to really help them out. This is an extraordinary group of women at Lilungu, another site south of Coco. They also traditionally protect bonobos, and that's not true everywhere. Further south at St. Kuru, they do not share those traditions. They always have a mystique about bonobos, but there they hunt bonobos for ritual use, for fertility rituals and so on. So it's been a harder battle down there. But here at Lilungu, they do protect them. But the women found that the bonobos, on a few occasions, had stolen their cooking pots. This is a problem. It's not easy to get cooking pots out there. So they decided on their own initiative, well, if the bonobos are stealing our crops and our cooking pots, we'll just make some for them. So they planted a buffer crop zone for the bonobos, so the bonobos can have their own food. It's pretty innovative. We founded a technical college in Jolu territory near Coco That also was one of the main things that was requested in return for creating the reserve. It was just accredited last year. And Alberto Bussola, as a result of all of our work in the region, he was just elected to DRC Parliament. So it's a real testimony to the impact we've been able to make, even with small efforts and not a whole lot of money. We've done a lot of training programs. As I said, our goal is to build the capacity of the Congolese. And that resulted in these three men here, Roger, Cosmas, and Jean-Gaston, each of whom got inspired to go and start their own community reserves. Roger, the one on facing me, he had participated in one of our training programs and our surveys at another site. And he was so inspired that he took his salary from that project and went and created his own association and got his community to agree to protect bonobos and start a reserve project. And now that's become 3. And so this is Jean-Gaston, who we just had an amazing marriage ceremony at Congo. So we married Congo. That's the marriage copper. That's the traditional Congolese. It weighs a ton too, but we had a symbolic marriage ceremony with Congo. And there, people started as volunteers. Until we can get the money, they work on their own. This is the new book about our work by Denis Béchard, The Race to Save Bonobos and Make Conservation Go Viral. This self-replicating phenomenon is described in more detail, along with many other adventures in this book, which Malaprops graciously is selling in the back, so you can check it out after the talk. And I'd just like to close tonight with a story about an orphan bonobo that we rescued. You know, orphans, unfortunately, are the tragic byproduct of the bushmeat trade. This one we named Kiboko because she was captured near that area. One day we were in Mbandaka at our office. It's a provincial office on the Congo River, which is a crossroads for the bushmeat trade. And we were hanging out on the porch and we saw this guy riding a bike down the street with a bonobo. So our guys tore out after him and we got the police to help us stop him and confiscate Kiboko. And she served as an ambassador with the police force. You know, before we started working, the police of this province that harbors most of the bonobo population didn't even know it was against their own laws or international laws to hunt bonobos. And now they're really helping us out in trying to protect, enforce laws. There's a lot of progress needs to be made on that front. But Kiboko was so sweet. When we first got her, she was completely dehydrated and traumatized. But after a little bit of TLC, she started to bounce back. And bonobo babies, they spend all their time with their mothers. They're on their mother's body at all times, moving with their mom. And so she kind of latched onto me, and we ate together, and we bathed together, and we talked on the phone together. We did everything together. She was crawling around, and I really bonded with her. And we slept together. And so the night before I had to fly her to Kinshasa to the Bonobo Sanctuary there, I had set the alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning so I would wake up early. And the alarm went off, and it was pitch black, of course. And so I'm groping around trying to find the alarm clock, and it's not where I put it. Finally, I find my flashlight, and I see that Kiboko had grabbed the alarm clock. And she's poking at it, sniffing it. It was this weird contraption making all this noise. And I just looked at her, feeling very bittersweet, knowing this would be my last day with her, but also just what a poignant image that was, that the alarm really is sounding for her species. And we need to act now to protect them while there's still time. Okay, well, thank you all so very much.